I never thought I'd find myself in the middle of a financial scandal, but life has a way of dropping you into situations you never expected. It all started when my wife and I moved into Lakeside Estates, a picturesque suburban neighborhood in Fairfield, Connecticut, with manicured lawns and homes that looked like they belonged in a real estate magazine. The peaceful setting seemed perfect until I met Pamela Wilson, the president of our homeowners association. My name is Lawson, and this is the story of how I uncovered a web of corruption that would ultimately send our HOA president to federal prison. We purchased our colonial-style home in Lakeside Estates in April 2023, excited about the community pool, the walking trails, and the promise of friendly neighbors. The real estate agent had mentioned the HOA in passing just $350 a month for all those amenities. It's a steal. But failed to mention the iron-fisted regime that enforced the community rules. Within our first week, a typed note appeared on our door. "Welcome to Lakeside Estates. Please remove the bird feeder in your backyard as it violates Section 7.3 of the HOA regulations. Thank you for your prompt attention to this matter. Pamela Wilson, HOA President." No personal introduction, no welcome basket, just a citation. My wife, Sarah, was annoyed but pragmatic. "Let's just take it down, Graham. No need to make enemies on our first week here." I reluctantly agreed, but this was just the beginning of my interactions with Pamela Wilson. Over the next few months, we received notices about everything from the color of our mailbox, apparently. Eggshell and off-white were not the same thing to the height of the decorative grasses in our landscaping. Pamela was in her mid-50s with perfectly highlighted blonde hair that never moved, even in the strongest wind. She drove a white Mercedes SUV and seemed to patrol the neighborhood at all hours, clipboard in hand. Most residents simply complied with her demands rather than face the wrath of the HOA board, which, as I would later learn, was essentially a rubber stamp for whatever Pamela wanted. 6 months into our life at Lakeside Estates, I received an email announcing a significant increase in our monthly HOA dues, from $350 to $500, effective immediately. The justification was vague infrastructure improvements and enhanced community services, but no specific projects were mentioned. At the next HOA meeting, I raised my hand to ask about the increase. The community center was packed with about 60 residents, most of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Pamela stood at the podium, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit. "Excuse me," I said when she asked for questions. "I was wondering if you could elaborate on the specific improvements that justify the 40% increase in our dues." Pamela's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Lawson, is it? The board has approved a comprehensive infrastructure plan that includes repairs to the community pool, upgrades to the security system, and landscape enhancements. Could we see the detailed budget for these projects?" I asked. "The budget details are available to any homeowner who submits a formal request in writing," she replied smoothly. Now, moving on to the next agenda item, something about her dismissive response bothered me. I wasn't the only one confused by the increase. I noticed several residents nodding in agreement with my question, but I seemed to be the only one willing to speak up. The next day, I submitted a formal request for the HOA financial records. According to Connecticut state law, HOA members have the right to inspect association records, including financial statements. I cited the relevant statute in my letter and hand-delivered it to the HOA office, a small room in the back of our community center. The office administrator, a nervous young woman named Jessica, accepted my letter with wide eyes. "I'll make sure Mrs. Wilson gets this," she said quietly. 2 weeks passed with no response. I sent a follow-up email which was met with silence. After a third attempt, I finally received a terse reply. "The board is reviewing your request. Due to the extensive nature of the documentation you've requested, there will be a processing fee of $250. This seemed excessive and possibly illegal. I had worked as a financial analyst for 15 years, and something about this situation was raising red flags. I decided to do some digging on my own. My first step was to talk to my neighbors. Most were reluctant to discuss the HOA, but a few shared their frustrations. Martin Chen, who lived 3 doors down, revealed that the security system upgrade Pamela mentioned had been announced 2 years ago, but never implemented. Eleanor Jenkins, an elderly woman who had lived in Lakeside Estates since its inception, mentioned that the community pool repairs were supposed to have been covered by a special assessment collected the previous year. Where did that money go? I wondered aloud as I sat with Eleanor on her front porch. She shrugged. Nobody knows. Pamela gives these beautiful presentations with colorful charts, but nothing ever changes except the dues keep going up. I decided to look into Pamela's background. A simple Google search revealed that she had served as HOA president for 8 years, an unusually long tenure. She was also the owner of a small property management company, Wilson Residential Services, which coincidentally had been contracted by our HOA to handle maintenance for the community. This was a clear conflict of interest, but apparently nobody had ever questioned it. I kept digging and discovered that, before moving to Connecticut, Pamela had been involved in a homeowners association in New Jersey that had dissolved amid rumors of financial mismanagement. Nothing had been proven, and she had quietly relocated to Fairfield shortly after. My professional instincts were now fully engaged. I reached out to Thomas Reynolds, a former colleague who had transitioned from financial analysis to forensic accounting. I need some advice, I explained over lunch at a small cafe in downtown Fairfield. I think my HOA president might be misappropriating funds, but I can't get access to the financial records. Thomas listened carefully as I outlined my suspicions. Without seeing the books, it's hard to know for sure, he said. But there's a workaround. Connecticut law requires HOAs to file annual financial reports with the Secretary of State's office. Those reports are public record. This was exactly the lead I needed. The next day, I visited the state government website and requested copies of Lakeside Estates HOA's financial filings for the past 5 years. While waiting for those documents, I also attended a county records office and found the property tax filings for our community's common areas. What I discovered was troubling. The HOA had reported spending over $200,000 on infrastructure improvements in the previous fiscal year, but there was no evidence of any major work being done in the community. The swimming pool still had the same cracked tiles it had when we moved in. The security cameras at the entrance were clearly non-functional, and the tennis courts remained unplayable due to large cracks in the surface. Even more concerning, I found that Wilson Residential Services was being paid nearly $15,000 monthly for property management services, far above the market rate for our size community. I also noticed that the HOA had purchased 3 maintenance vehicles in the past 2 years at a cost of over $120,000, but I had only ever seen one aging pickup truck with the Lakeside Estates logo. I was building a case, but I needed more concrete evidence. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting and bring these discrepancies to light. The meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in late November. I arrived early and took a seat in the front row, my folder of documents on my lap. The board members filed in, followed by Pamela, who gave me a tight smile before calling the meeting to order. During the open forum, I stood up and addressed the board. I've been looking into our community's finances, I began, and I've found some troubling inconsistencies between what's been reported to the state and what we're actually seeing in terms of improvements. I outlined my findings, keeping my tone professional but firm. For example, we spent $85,000 on pool repairs last year according to the financial reports, yet the pool remains in disrepair. Can someone explain where that money went? The room fell silent. Board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Pamela's face flushed red, but she quickly regained her composure. "Mr. Lawson," she said icily, "these are serious allegations that you're making based on incomplete information. The board will not dignify them with a response in this forum. If you have concerns, I suggest you follow proper channels and submit them in writing." "I did submit a formal request for financial records over a month ago," I responded. "I still haven't received them, despite it being my legal right as a homeowner." "Your request is being processed," she said dismissively. "Now, if there are no further questions, we'll move on to new business." Several residents approached me after the meeting, some expressing support, others warning me to back off. "You don't want to make an enemy of Pamela," cautioned Bill Foster, a retiree who had lived in the community for a decade. "She has ways of making life difficult for people who cross her." I soon discovered what he meant. The following week, I received notices for violations I'd never been cited for before: improper trash can placement, unauthorized garden ornaments, and excessive vehicle presence in my driveway when my parents visited for Thanksgiving. My wife was becoming concerned. "Graham, maybe we should just let this go," Sarah suggested as we reviewed the latest round of violation notices. "We can pay the increased dues. It's not worth making our lives miserable over this." I might have agreed if what happened next hadn't pushed me past the point of no return. A week after the confrontation at the HOA meeting, I was laid off from my job due to a company restructuring. As I was updating my LinkedIn profile, I received a message from a former colleague at my company. "Sorry to hear about the layoff, Graham. Strange coincidence, I heard our CEO got a call from someone named Pamela Wilson claiming you were involved in harassing behavior in your neighborhood." Obviously, no one believed it, but weird timing, right? I was stunned. Pamela had actually tried to interfere with my employment. This was no longer just about mismanaged HOA funds, this was personal and potentially illegal. I decided it was time to bring in professionals. My first call was to the Fairfield Police Department. The officer I spoke with was sympathetic, but explained that without concrete evidence of embezzlement, there wasn't much they could do. "HOA disputes are usually civil matters," he explained. "Unless you have proof of a crime, our hands are tied." Thomas Reynolds, my forensic accountant friend, suggested a different approach. "If you're talking about amounts over $100,000, and if she's using interstate banking or electronic fund transfers, this could fall under federal jurisdiction. You might want to contact the FBI." The idea of calling the FBI seemed extreme, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had evidence of financial discrepancies totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars over several years, potential tax fraud, and now attempts at retaliation. This went beyond a neighborhood dispute. I called the FBI field office in New Haven, and after being transferred several times, finally spoke with Agent Daniel Martinez, who specialized in white-collar crime. I explained the situation, expecting to be dismissed, but to my surprise, he listened attentively. "We've seen cases like this before, Mr. Lawson," he said. "HOAs handle significant amounts of money with relatively little oversight, which makes them vulnerable to this kind of abuse. I can't promise anything, but I'd like to review the documentation you've gathered." I spent the weekend organizing all my findings: the state financial filings, property records, tax documents, copies of my unanswered requests for information, and notes from conversations with neighbors. I also included information about Pamela's previous HOA in New Jersey and the apparent conflict of interest with her property management company. When I met with Agent Martinez at a coffee shop the following week, he reviewed my documents with a professional eye. "You've done some solid preliminary work here," he said. "There's enough to warrant a closer look, but I should warn you, these investigations can take time and you need to be prepared for potential backlash." "She's already tried to get me fired," I replied. "I'm not backing down now." Agent Martinez nodded. "We'll need to interview other residents and former board members. Would you be willing to help us identify potential witnesses? Over the next few weeks, I discreetly provided the FBI with names of residents who might have relevant information. Agent Martinez and his partner, Agent Rebecca Torres, began conducting interviews under the guise of a community satisfaction survey. Meanwhile, the hostility from Pamela intensified. I received a certified letter stating that I was in violation of the HOA's Community Harmony Clause and would be fined $100 per day until I ceased my disruptive activities. When I showed the letter to Agent Martinez, he advised me to document everything but not engage directly with Pamela or the board. The investigation gained momentum in January 2024 when Jessica, the nervous HOA office administrator, approached me while I was walking my dog. Looking over her shoulder nervously, she handed me a USB drive. "I could lose my job for this," she whispered, "but what she's doing isn't right. These are copies of the real financial records for the past 3 years, not the ones shown to the board or filed with the state." I immediately contacted Agent Martinez, who arranged for Jessica to give a formal statement. The documents she provided were damning. They showed systematic diversion of funds from the HOA accounts to Wilson Residential Services, which then transferred money to Pamela's personal accounts or paid for her personal expenses, including her Mercedes, a vacation home in Vermont, and her daughter's college tuition. The most shocking discovery was a separate set of books that Pamela maintained to present to the board and in official filings. These falsified records showed legitimate-looking expenses for community improvements that had never been made. With this new evidence, the FBI investigation accelerated. In February, agents executed search warrants on the HOA office and Pamela's home and business. The community was stunned as FBI agents carried boxes of documents and computers from the community center. Pamela was not arrested that day, but the message was clear: this was now a serious federal investigation. She immediately hired Stanley Hoffman, a high-profile defense attorney known for representing white-collar criminals. Through her lawyer, she issued a statement declaring her innocence and claiming that she was being targeted by disgruntled homeowners with personal vendettas. The community's reaction was mixed. Some residents expressed shock and betrayal, while others remained loyal to Pamela, convinced that the investigation was an overreaction to minor accounting discrepancies. A few, including Bill Foster, approached me to apologize for not taking my concerns seriously earlier. "We all suspected something wasn't right," Bill admitted, "but it was easier to just go along with it than to rock the boat." In April, 6 months after I had first questioned the HOA fee increase, the U.S. Attorney's Office announced charges against Pamela Wilson. The indictment was extensive: wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion, and witness tampering, the last charge stemming from her attempts to intimidate Jessica and other potential witnesses. According to the prosecutors, Pamela had embezzled over $1.3 million from Lakeside Estates HOA over 7 years. She had also failed to report this income on her taxes and had used interstate wire transfers to move the money between various accounts, triggering federal jurisdiction. The case against Pamela was solid, but the legal process moved slowly. Her attorney filed motion after motion, seeking to suppress evidence and dismiss charges. Meanwhile, the HOA was in chaos. The remaining board members, some of whom were being investigated for their possible involvement, resigned en masse. The state appointed a receiver to manage the association's affairs until new elections could be held. During this transition period, I was approached by several neighbors who urged me to run for a position on the board. I was hesitant at first. My goal had been to expose corruption, not to take on a leadership role, but Sarah encouraged me to consider it. "You started this," she pointed out. "Don't you want to be part of rebuilding it the right way?" She was right. In June 2024, I was elected to the interim HOA board along with 4 other homeowners who were committed to transparency and proper governance. Our first actions were to conduct a full audit of the association's finances, reduce the monthly dues back to a reasonable level, and establish clear procedures for financial oversight. We also initiated a civil lawsuit against Pamela and her property management company to recover the stolen funds. Our attorney, Melissa Rodriguez, advised us that even if Pamela went to prison, recovering the money would be a separate battle. "A lot of it is probably gone," she explained. "Spent on her lifestyle or hidden in accounts we haven't found yet, but we'll do our best to recover what we can." In September 2024, as we were beginning to restore the community's trust and finances, Pamela's criminal case took an unexpected turn. Her attorney approached the U.S. Attorney's Office about a potential plea deal. After weeks of negotiation, she agreed to plead guilty to wire fraud and tax evasion in exchange for having the other charges dropped. The plea agreement required her to make full restitution to the HOA and to cooperate with investigators looking into similar schemes at other associations, including her previous one in New Jersey. Even with the reduced charges, she was facing significant prison time. On a cold November morning, I sat in the federal courthouse in New Haven as Pamela Wilson stood before Judge Caroline Menendez for sentencing. She looked smaller somehow, her perfectly highlighted hair now showing gray roots, her designer outfit replaced by a conservative navy suit. Her attorney argued for leniency, citing her previous clean record and her willingness to make restitution. Pamela herself made a brief statement, apologizing for her actions but characterizing them as errors in judgment rather than deliberate fraud. Judge Menendez was not swayed. "Mrs. Wilson," she said, "you systematically defrauded your neighbors and violated the trust placed in you as a community leader. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment but a calculated scheme carried out over many years. The court cannot overlook the magnitude and duration of your criminal activity." The sentence was 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Pamela would also be required to pay restitution of $1.3 million to the Lakeside Estates HOA, plus penalties and interest on her unpaid taxes, as Pamela was led away by U.S. Marshals. I felt no joy, only a sense that justice had been served. The damage she had done went beyond the financial loss. She had destroyed the community's sense of trust and togetherness. The aftermath of the case brought significant changes to Lakeside Estates. With the help of a professional property management company, vetted thoroughly and with strict oversight, we repaired the long-neglected pool and tennis courts. We revised the HOA bylaws to include term limits for board members and mandatory annual external audits. Most importantly, we worked to rebuild the sense of community that had been lost under Pamela's regime. We organized neighborhood events, created a more collaborative approach to rule enforcement, and established open communication channels between the board and residents. Recovery of the embezzled funds proved challenging, as our attorney had predicted. Pamela's assets were seized and liquidated, but they only covered about 60% of what she had stolen. Her vacation home had a substantial mortgage, and many of her luxury purchases had depreciated significantly. The HOA had to make difficult decisions about how to move forward with a smaller budget than we had anticipated. In early 2025, nearly 2 years after I had first questioned the HOA fee increase, I received a letter from Jessica, the former office administrator who had provided the crucial evidence to the FBI. She was now working for a non-profit organization in Boston. "I wanted to thank you for having the courage to stand up when no one else would," she wrote. "Working for Pamela, I saw so many residents get bulldozed by her, and I was too afraid to do anything about it for a long time. You showed me that one person really can make a difference." Her words resonated with me. When I had first moved to Lakeside Estates, all I had wanted was a peaceful suburban life. I never expected to become the center of a federal fraud investigation or to help rebuild a fractured community. But sometimes life puts you in situations where you have to choose between comfort and doing what's right. The experience changed me in unexpected ways. I found a new job as a financial compliance officer for a local credit union, where my experience with the HOA case was seen as valuable. I developed friendships with neighbors who had stood by me during the investigation, creating a support network we had never had in our previous home. Sarah and I decided to stay in Lakeside Estates, even after the turmoil of the past 2 years. The community was healing, becoming the kind of place we had originally hoped for when we bought our home. 1 year after Pamela's sentencing, we hosted a community barbecue in our backyard, complete with a bird feeder that would have violated the old HOA rules. As I watched our neighbors chatting and laughing together, many for the first time since moving to the neighborhood, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. Exposing Pamela's embezzlement scheme had been difficult, and at times frightening. There were moments when I questioned whether it was worth the stress and potential risk. But looking at our revitalized community, I knew I had made the right choice. The experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, that financial oversight is essential in any organization, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Second, that courage is contagious. Once I began asking questions, others found the confidence to speak up as well. And finally, that communities thrive on transparency, fairness, and genuine collaboration. As new residents move into Lakeside Estates, they often hear the story of the embezzlement scandal from longtime homeowners. It has become part of our community's lore, a cautionary tale that reminds us to remain vigilant and engaged. We make sure new board members understand the responsibility they're taking on and the importance of ethical leadership. In 2027, as I completed my final term on the HOA board, I received word that Pamela Wilson had been denied her first parole attempt. The parole board cited her lack of full acceptance of responsibility for her actions. She would serve at least 2 more years before becoming eligible again. I felt no satisfaction at this news, only a renewed commitment to ensuring that our community never returned to the environment that had allowed her to operate unchecked for so long. We had instituted annual financial training for all board members, regular town halls where financial statements were reviewed in detail, and an anonymous reporting system for potential ethical concerns. The civil lawsuit against Pamela's estate continued for several years as we attempted to recover the remaining funds. Eventually, we reached a settlement that allowed us to recoup about 80% of the stolen money. These funds went toward long-deferred maintenance projects and establishing a reserve fund to prevent the need for special assessments in the future. On a personal level, the case had given me a new perspective on community involvement. Before moving to Lakeside Estates, I had been relatively disengaged from local governance, viewing it as someone else's responsibility. Now, I understood that democracy at all levels, even in something as seemingly mundane as a homeowners association, requires active participation and oversight from ordinary citizens. I began mentoring other HOA boards in the region, sharing our story and helping them implement better financial controls and governance practices. The Connecticut State Legislature even invited me to testify during hearings on a bill that would increase transparency requirements for homeowners associations. The bill, which passed in 2028, was informally known among some legislators as the Pamela Wilson Act. Sarah sometimes teases me about becoming the HOA crusader, but she understands why this has become important to me. What happened at Lakeside Estates wasn't unique. Similar schemes have been uncovered in communities across the country, often with less satisfactory outcomes. The FBI later informed me that information provided by Pamela as part of her plea agreement had led to investigations of similar embezzlement schemes in 3 other states. Agent Martinez occasionally sends me updates on these cases, always with a note of thanks for bringing the initial case to their attention. In spring 2031, nearly 8 years after I first uncovered the financial discrepancies, I received notification that Pamela Wilson had been released from federal prison. According to the terms of her sentence, she was prohibited from serving on any board of directors or managing financial accounts for others. She had also been ordered to pay restitution for the remainder of the stolen funds, a process that would likely take the rest of her life. I don't know where Pamela went after her release, and I've made no attempt to find out. Her chapter in our community's story was closed. What matters now is the community we've built in the aftermath, transparent, collaborative, and truly serving the interests of the residents. Lakeside Estates today barely resembles the community we moved into in 2023. The oppressive atmosphere has been replaced by a genuine neighborhood spirit. Rules still exist, but they're enforced with common sense and respect. Financial decisions are made openly, with detailed information available to any homeowner who asks, no formal written request required. When I walk around the neighborhood now, I see families enjoying the pool that was finally properly repaired, seniors playing tennis on the resurfaced courts, and children riding bikes on streets that feel safe and welcoming. Neighbors greet each other by name, and new residents are welcomed with genuine hospitality rather than a list of regulations. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't spoken up at that HOA meeting years ago. If I had simply paid the increased dues and looked the other way, like so many others had done for years. Pamela might still be running her scheme, the community funds might still be disappearing into her personal accounts, and the neighborhood would still be ruled by fear rather than cooperation. It's easy to dismiss homeowners' associations as trivial, concerned with lawn height and fence colors rather than matters of real importance. But what I learned through this ordeal is that governance matters at every level. The principles that make democracy work, transparency, accountability, citizen participation, are just as essential in a suburban HOA as they are in national government. As I sit on my back porch, watching cardinals visit the bird feeder that once violated HOA rules, I feel a deep satisfaction in knowing that sometimes one person asking the right questions can make all the difference. My confrontation with Pamela Wilson wasn't just about the money, though $1.3 million is certainly significant. It was about reclaiming our community from someone who had abused her position of trust. It was about standing up for what's right, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. And in the end, it was about building something better from the ashes of corruption, a true community where people look out for each other, where rules serve the common good rather than personal power, and where transparency is not just a buzzword but a way of life. That, I believe, is the real victory in this story. Not just that a criminal was brought to justice, but that in exposing the darkness, we found our way to something brighter and more genuine than what we had before. As new families continue to move into Lakeside Estates, drawn by the community's reputation for good governance and neighborly spirit, I take quiet pride in knowing that I played a part in creating the home we all wanted from the beginning. A place where the HOA serves the residents, not the other way around.